Can you see that transition there where I just changed to the antitrust policy?
Yep.
Okay. Well, as Shane says, we need to go through the antitrust policy notice, but I am not going to sit here and read it to you. I think you all are familiar with it. And if you have any questions, it is available to you on that web link right there on the Linux Foundation antitrust policy. So if you have any questions, you can either talk to your company legal counsel or a member of the Linux Foundation. So there's the regular agenda that we go through every week. I have some news, some work on the standards and core material, and then we'll talk about work on reference and supporting materials, see if there's any other business, and then we'll close the meeting out. So for news today, there was some big news this week. Okay, this is the elections. Elections are still perking along. They've been submitted to the governing board, and so we'll wait and see how they approve and ratify the chairs for the next series this month. So that's the status of them. Telco Group, their elections are underway in the February, and I believe they were closing out at the end of the month. So we should get some results from that here by the next meeting. And then we had AI study group met earlier this week. And there's the mailing list if you'd like to join the AI study group. Or was that today? That may have been earlier today. So they're just trying to talk about how to build trust in the open source AI supply chain. I think the news from Google earlier this week probably has upset that a little bit. We'll just have to see how all that goes. Uh, but it's a good case study to talk about as far as AI and trust and what are compliance artifacts that need to be looked at in our specs. So it'll be a good discussion point, I'm sure. So today we're going to look a little bit toward I think we'll start with the licensing spec and take a look at that. We did look at just the security spec in the Asia North American meeting a couple of weeks ago and addressed a couple of the issues in there, and Shane marked them as now closed on consensus from the group. So that's good. Love to close these things out. Maybe we'll get rid of some of those older ones as we go through here. So here's the link. They all have a link to the. Oops, I guess I have to get out of the sharing mode too. Okay, I'm not real good at working these things back and forth. So here's a copy of the licensing specification. If you'd like me to paste the paste that into the chat session, I could do that. Okay, there you go. So we're gonna pop over to the licensing spec here, and I will share that window. So here's the licensing specification window, and I picked the oldest open issue that's here. Which was from back in 2019 by Andrew. Andrew, are you on today? It was a question about the scope clause in the software solutions comprised of just of open source software, and he felt that it suggested that open source software by itself, this indicates that that's the supplied software, and that's all they're talking about. So there has been quite a bit of discussion on this, and it was discussed again in the meeting on December the 15th of 2022. And so the improved scope is right in here. And it instead of, so what it's going to say now is it containing open source software instead of comprised of open source software. And that change should alleviate a concern from a wording standpoint that these specs are only concerned with exclusively open source software. So in other words, as one of the organizations out there is delivering software, they may have commercial software embedded in their product, and so they still want to be able to and should be able to certify that they are conforming with the specification, even though it's not totally open source software, which was kind of indicated by the word comprised of open source software. So that's a good change. And so if y'all are in agreement with that, I'm going to put a note in here to Shane and say that that the group agrees that we should be able to close this issue out. Do we have anybody have any discussion on that?
I'm not a lawyer, but I would say that that's a good change. Jimmy, you are
Okay.
the lawyer here.
Who's the lawyer?
Jimmy.
Unfortunately, I'm the lawyer.
Oh, that's why you were being quiet.
Yep,
What do you
I
think?
know better than to say something unless I have to, right? No, but I agree. This is a good change. I suggested something similar that I think came into this as well, that it may contain open source software. So I think this is a good change.
Yes, I saw your comment in there as well. Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Oh, more lawyers.
More lawyers?
Yeah,
Well,
Damilola.
all right. Well, if we don't have any objections from the lawyers and the smart technical people, then we'll go ahead and mark this as ready to close. All right. There we go. All right. So we'll mark that one as closed. I see that Shane had worked that language right here, so he's obviously in agreement with it. So we'll lock the conversation and we'll go from there. All right. So the next issue that we had was verification material for training, and that was opened by Andrew as well. And Andrew hasn't joined. Nope. I see Russ sitting back there being quiet, though.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Okay, so I guess the current spec has some. He was suggesting that we add a new bullet between the lines 1.2.2 and 1.2.3, or somewhere in the numbering there, that says documented evidence that an appropriate training course or courses exist and have been undertaken by program participants. And Mark, it looks like you were in agreement. Okay. Well, I think that what do y'all think about that? You all agree that that would be a great add to the specification? I don't know if Andrew had done any pull requests. No, no, we don't want to go there. If we want to go back to the text, we can go back, and he said that's 122 and 123. So let's go back and see what. Okay, it looks like it's been renumbered.
Yeah, I was checking the specification as well, and I don't, there are no numbers up to 4 because it's
Yeah,
three
and if we
six
get,
is the biggest number. 362.
does that talk about adherence to specification? Yep, 362. Verification materials. So this is probably the section where something like that would go, because he is talking about verification materials, and we could add it to this section right here. And that would even fit in with the rationale without changing the rationale section, I think. Of course, I am not a lawyer. So, what do y'all think? If we were to add another section in here and call it 3.6.1.2?
Chris, is that relative or specific to just the training aspect?
The comment is, yes, it is. Let's go back to issues, verification material. So his point was that if we added, oh, he said in section 4.1.2, I didn't see a 4.1.2, but it says, yeah, just documented evidence of assessed compliance competence,
Competence, yeah.
yeah, for each program participant. And he's going, and so when Andrew came back, he said that it makes it difficult to come up with an audit specification if there is only verification material for assessments. And he'd rather see a requirement also for a training assessment policy, even though it's lightweight, better than nothing at all.
I think the problem is, and I mean, just mild. I don't know if objection's the right word here, but for smaller companies, it's probably not a big deal to implement and roll out a full training program for everybody, including all developers. But when you get into these large organizations with thousands of developers, I mean, rolling out training like that takes a long time. The other consideration is if you've got a centralized model for an OSPO or for open source governance, you don't necessarily have to have that level of detailed training for someone that might be considered a participant, like a developer. They should have awareness, obviously, but the people who run the program are the ones that I think we're trying to say should have this required training. I don't know how we differentiate um, with Andrew's comments specifically between
Yeah,
the
you're
two.
right.
Like I think the way it's written, I think we're covered. If we get deeper, I think we lose that breadth that we currently have.
Let's go back to the current spec and look at it for just a second again.
And I guess the current is it like 2.1 or 3.0? Because we are like working on 3.0 now.
Pardon
But
me?
I think yeah, because we have like 2.1 is I guess the current ISO spec, and 3.0 is the the new one.
Yes. Yeah, that's why I pulled that one up.
But I think both have that mark, put the little sentence like documented evidence of assessed competence for each program participant, that it's under 3.2, relevant tasks defined and supported.
Yeah, under competence right here at the
Yeah,
top level.
yeah.
Yep. Documented open source policy and a documented procedure that makes participants aware of the existence of open source policy, e.g. via training, internal wiki, or other practical communication methods.
So if this is just awareness via training, then agreed. I thought based on at least what I could see, and it's small on my screen, I thought the comment was relative to a training program that it was required.
No, he was talking about training, but he didn't talk about awareness. And I think that this is a good solution, actually. It looks like it's already been incorporated in there. Let's roll down a little bit more.
What you showed makes sense.
Okay, verification materials. Yeah, 3331 is probably more specifically verification materials for license compliance, because that is the top level of that section. So yeah, I guess it would depend on how deep we want to dig into this to put the awareness part. If it's sufficient to have it back up there at where it was at the beginning of this section, or have it spelled out again down here deeper into the thing. Yeah, here it is. It's right back in again, 3513. Document a procedure that makes all participants aware of the existence of open source contribution policy via training, wiki, practical communication methods, etc.
Yeah, well, this is for the contributions,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Is
Yeah, I
that what
think
Andrew's comment was relative to?
no. Pardon me. Let's go. Let's go back. Is it Andrew's comment now? Whoops. Yeah, he just says he's coming up with a template for open source policy for review, and he said there's no requirement for documentation evidencing that a proper training program exists. So he's talking about a training program.
And that it exists.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people remember, but I remember that early days, I think for the training, we had, and it was not in a specification like we're talking now, but there was this um, checklist, I would say, and I think there we even had the 80% of the engineers have done the open source training, but that's taken out now.
Yeah, there's been quite a bit of discussion about that going back and forth.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, he came back the next year. Yeah, there's verification material for in the audit specification. There's verification material for assessments, but there's nothing in there for any training or assessment policy. All right. So I guess we could mark this as further discussion with the larger board or at the next meeting and see what their opinion is. What do you think?
Yep, and all of these comments are three and a
Old.
half years old, the newest
Right.
one. So I
Mm-hmm.
think I think it would be good to have, like, I don't know, Andrew and Mark to add their new comments.
Yeah,
If this
maybe.
is still relevant or not, I don't know.
All right. I can take a action item to talk to Mark and Andrew and see if we can see if the current version that's ISO spec or the one that we're working on in draft is sufficient to address their concerns, because it is mentioned up there. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think that's, to me, that sounds like a good solution at least.
I don't know, maybe also tag them in the comments so that it kind of pops up for Andrew and Mark.
Oops, what did I do? Big fingers. And big work. Uh, all right. Does that work? Can you read it? No? Too small?
No.
I
Yep.
Yeah, I just asked them if they believe that the requirement for training awareness, etc., is now adequately addressed in the current version of the ISO spec or in the draft that we're working on to allow us to close this.
Okay.
Everybody else in agreement? All right, hearing no objections from the bench, we'll 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 put that note in there and see if we can get some response back from them, and I'll pull it out and see what they've got to say, and if they're in agreement that we can close it, then we'll just recommend that to Shane that we go ahead and do that. What do you think?
Sounds good.
All right. So this is the only other one that we've got left in the license specification that's still open from back in the old days, and those are the ones that I'd like to get cleared out before we start adding new ones to the stack. Because we're in 2024 now, and this one is, yeah, back in 2019 as well. Okay. Okay, so his concern was about the distribution or makes available uh, as it relates to designating a software as a service product being subject to open source. And of course, there are more than just a few of those these days. Okay. Yeah, and that's a difficult one. I'm sure for the lawyers to think about with some of the recent licensing that's come up that seems to specifically point at that kind of software, and just mere access to the software might be making it available under the terms of the license, and therefore you have to treat all the software, including your contributions and all the contributions that make it work. Okay, SAS backend OpenChain compliant. I am not a lawyer. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I don't know.
I just read through this little discussion, but I think like Andrew has like the first like makes available. It could be made available for download, and that normally, to my understanding, again, I'm not a lawyer, counts as a distribution. So
Well, some of the new licenses actually require you to distribute a copy of all the source code, including uh, extending to libraries and things that are required to actually make it perform.
yeah,
So yeah, it's I'm not sure I'd want to make a decision without having the legal guidance. Could we get an informal thoughts on the idea from any lawyers in the crowd?
Sorry, what's the specific question?
Well, the question is he's thinking that we're he was wanting to make a differentiation about the SAS software and whether it's considered to be a distribution or not, and that's really license driven.
But to begin with, wasn't the question of how and if a SaaS-based offering can be OpenChain conformant, or how they would show that?
Yes.
my thoughts on that is that that's more to it's more to the development environment, and if they have satisfied all the requirements, you could of course go beyond that and say we're gonna act as if our SaaS offering had been a distribution, and we're gonna offer all the source code to anyone as if we had a SaaS offering. But that's going way beyond what could be expected. So for me, I'm sorry, I just don't really see the issue they're having here, since OpenChain is more for the program that led up to the software. It doesn't really touch on the distribution model. It just means that more or less requirements may be applicable. Perhaps I'm missing something in Andrew's comments here.
Yeah, I think he's looking at organizations that may be creating SaaS software to put in one of the cloud services. And if we do that, should the distribution extend to distribute or make available for that SaaS offering in order for you to say that I've reviewed all of the licensing and we are going to, but again, that's so heavily dependent on which one of those wonky new licenses, and they seem to pop up rather frequently these days, the vendors trying to get full distribution of the system that contains the bad license in it. Well, I say bad license. For me, it's a bad license because I'm on the consumer end.
Mm-hmm.
But from an open chain, if you were really going to be conformant and you were producing software that was going to be intended as a SaaS offering in, say, Amazon or Azure or one of the other clouds that's out there, then they might want to have language in there that allows them to be fully compliant by the distribution or make available. I don't know.
For me,
That
it's
depends on the language of the license itself, what it is asking for compliance.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's what I think.
yeah, because it's either a distribution have happened and you need to do something, or a distribution haven't happened. But to me, that doesn't really impact the open chain certification or the open chain conformance of whatever software it is you have developed. And we don't really, of course, you could certify that a certain piece of software was developed in an open chain conformant program, but that's what we're really doing, right? We're certifying, or the certification specification is for the program, not necessarily the software that comes out of that program, but we assume that software coming out of that program is then conformant or have been developed in accordance with specification.
But like, how would that work? So like, if you have developed a particular software for internal use only, where the software is not leaving your company's premises, but then using OpenChain's compliant process, you would consider that software as compliant. But if the same software, some salesperson decides, hey, I can sell this, now the software becomes a distribution or a service, then there would be a different licenses may require different compliance. So like that would change. So it would depend on the use case.
Yes.
Well, technically, even if from the way that I read those licenses, even if you are using it internally only, but you have people who are not employees of your organization that use that software, technically it's a distribution to them, isn't it?
Or if you ship it between legal entities, that could also be considered a distribution. even within the same corporate group, even if they're all majority-owned companies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But
in the
again, how?
license.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just like thinking like even though, let's say there are SaaS or making available or distributing, like Jimmy, you were saying that again, how does that affect the open chain specification? Not really, at least in my opinion, because open chain specification is more about the processes, having the processes in place so that if you follow all those processes, in the end you will have compliant program, or you are in compliance with the licenses, and that should be kind of given in my opinion, that you follow the license terms and conditions, even though if you change the distribution model from internal only to I don't know, distributed.
Right.
My 2 cents.
And
Yeah,
I would agree with that. It's just that the end result of what you need to produce is different. It doesn't sort of you need to do as much as you need to do, right? That's my thinking. And if your use case requires you to do more, then you need to do more.
Yeah, because I think there are a lot of times when an organization builds a piece of software for internal use, and after using it, and maybe some of your customers see the results that come out of it, say, hey, that's really great. How did you do that? And you realize that maybe there is some potential for distributing your software outside. You're not going to go back and do another whole study of your license compliance to make sure that you actually addressed all of the use cases. You should do that if you're conformant with the open source licensing policy. You should have done that up front and documented, these are the things that I need to do if I use it internally, if I share it with somebody that's not that's a third party to me internally, and what happens if I sell it or use it as a software as a service, which is essentially putting it for sale out there because it's a service that you pay for.
So I can perhaps share our sort of the internal discussions we had for length on this exact topic, because we have an abundance of internal tools that's been developed. Occasionally, one of our customers will see those and say, hey, that's great. I really want to buy that. And of course, we'd like to sell everything we can. So of course, we say, absolutely, let us polish this up and give you a quote on that. And that has happened sort of often enough that we have realized that we need to have sort of some minimum requirements, or even on internal tools when it comes to open source process and compliance. But we should not have the whole bells and whistles, because it's sort of in the end, it's easier for us to fix those small additional stuff. If we have the basics right, we can add sort of the last bits and pieces later if a customer decides to buy it. That's in terms of man hour and sort of just how we spend our time. That's time better spent if we fix those last things once a customer actually says, I want to buy this. But we need to have all the basics in place to be able to deliver on that quickly. So we need to have, they should use our central repository. They need to register the components they are using, not just from a license compliant perspective, but also from a security perspective, and so on. So we need to have all the basics there to be able to do the compliance work. But perhaps we don't put together and deliver an SBOM to the same degree as we would as if this were a external. We have that information, but we don't put it together when it's just an internal tool, for example, or we don't put together the source distribution in the same way as we would with an external product. The same way, if this comes with documentation, of course, if we send it to a customer, it has different requirements on the documentation than if this is just an internal tool. And in the same way as compliance, so we should have like all the basics there, just as we should with a manual. There needs to be some documentation even for an internal tool, and the same way there needs to be some basics there, is even if it's a internal tool. And ideally, those basics should allow us to put out a conformant and compliant product, and it should still have been developed by people who are part of the program, who have gone through the training, who have that documented, etc., etc. So they fulfill all of these like requirements that comes before that. But when we put it out to the customer, then there might be some additional work to be done. And I will think that even if we were to do that as a SaaS offering, or if we would be to do that as a physical distribution, or a quote unquote redistribution, or perhaps do both, we would still need to do that. But it doesn't change that everything up until the point where we decided that this is now leaving our company, that should have been done in an OpenChain conformant matter, because we can't go back and redo that. We can't go back and have the software redeveloped by people who has taken the training, right? So we need to have that part correct before. And then if there's comes to things like having the artifacts in place, having software bill of material, etc., those things we can fix those later at the point in time when it's decided that this will fit. Sorry, that was a long monologue.
So are you suggesting that perhaps that we should identify all of the component parts in the beginning that might have to be distributed if the SaaS offering was sold as a SaaS, or I mean, if the application was used as a SaaS offering with one of those bad licenses? Because my concern is that if you do that and you haven't done a full assessment up front of the real requirements, you may not understand that looking at that application that you're also running some, let's say, COTS or proprietary libraries or processes in the background that make that application do what it's doing. And if you turn it into a SaaS offering with one of those licenses that requires distribution of the software and all the underlying tools that are used to build it, and the libraries and everything else that makes it an actual application, then you may not be able to as easily comply with that, and if you don't already know it. In other words, you may be using a COTS library that you got out of one of the development tools that does a specific function within your application, and yet you don't have redistribution rights for that COTS applications library with software. So if you don't do the full-blown examination up front of all the business cases, you're not going to understand that and then be able to adjust what you're doing. You don't want to tell a customer, yeah, we'll polish this up and get it over to you, when in fact you don't have the rights to redistribute some portion of that. Am I missing what your point was?
No, I don't necessarily think you missed my point, Chris. It's probably my fault for not really having a point. More just sharing how I view the thing and how we have discussed it internally. That it
Okay.
makes no sense to have every single tool developed internally developed to the standard we would develop a product, because that comes with an additional cost. So we have to accept that when we develop something for internal purposes, yes, sometimes that might become a product that we want to sell, but we have to accept that that will come with some cost in fixing that when we want to sell it, if we want to sell it. Because doing everything to the standard we would be doing for a product would be prohibitively expensive for the amount of internal tools we are developing.
True. Okay.
So I'm more pointing to the problem rather than a solution or saying how things necessarily should be done. But I guess there are certain aspects that sort of you need to have them in place to begin with, because you can't go back and fix them. Or I'm thinking that there might be things in the specification that they need to be in place when the software is developed, because you can't go back and necessarily fix them. The case you bring up is a good example. But on the other hand, you can not necessarily for the exact same version of software, but you can always sort of say, oh, this didn't work for the non-internal use case because we don't have those rights, so we need to find an alternative. But then your policy can't be that or of course you need to decide, is my policy that every internal tool we develop should be possible to sell on to our customers, or should the policy be that something else? So no, I'm just agree with the problem, I guess, or stating some examples of this in practice.
Yeah, I agree with that line of thinking. I don't think that we should ever ask anyone who wants to be OpenChain conformant to develop all of their internal tools to be able to be sold. I think that would be counterproductive, but I do think that there needs to be some thought that goes into what do you need to know when you're developing those tools, so that in the chance that you ever did try to sell it, what actions, what direction would you need to go? Is it good to go as it is, or am I going to have to do some extensive rework to it?
I fully agree with that statement. I think that summarizes it very well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What do you all think as a group? Do you think we ought to punt this to the legal groups at the Linux Foundation and let them address it and see what their thoughts are on this? Or should we just keep things as they are right now? Because his question is, what is considered as the distribution varies, and this is Hans's last thoughts, varies from license to license, and that's absolutely correct, and it's become from a technical standpoint more correct as the 2021, 2022, and 2023 have come along, because we've gotten a few more of those licenses pushed out into the ecosphere.
Yeah, if I may just bring in my 2 cents, Philippe Ombrelan. So I've often asked the same question to lawyers when we do due diligence analysis of large code base, what constitutes distribution. And I eventually evolved a set of simple tests. And the test is whether there's loss of control over the software. So typically, anything that's in a device, you surrender control of the device to someone else. As an example. On the other hand, if you have software that, say, is hosted at the Google App Engine or Amazon Web Service, typically, lawyers we've talked to consider that as long as it's on your account, it's under your control. If it's then hosted by somebody else on your behalf, it depends whether there's transfer of control or not. If they act as your agent, for instance, as a work for hire, then there's probably no transfer. And if you think, for instance, a SaaS application, the backend in most cases is under your control. The front end, which could be a large React-based JavaScript application, typically you've surrendered control to the user. And I found when there's these ambiguities, the simple test of who has the control over the software, really, really useful to decide whether there's really redistribution. So take the case of, say, a large organization with many different legal entities, all under the same, say, ownership. It depends when you're going to have surrender of control and effective distribution or not. But in many cases, it could be different legal entities, but they're still not the same, say, concern, umbrella, ownership. And there may not be, in this case, effective transfer of control.
Yeah.
So just I found that really useful to frame the problem in a very simple binary test. Is there control or no control?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the technical and the legal definitions of when does the line get crossed with SaaS software is really concrete. Mm-hmm. I think we may have to have more of a deeper discussion about this whole subject. Pardon me. With Shane and see what direction he wants to go. Do the lawyers in the audience agree that that's not something that I think we're going to be able to directly answer from a technical standpoint without some deeper discussion about whether or not we should actually address it in this specification?
I just posted the link to the 2.8 supplied software, and this is what it says there. So, like software that an organization distributes to third parties, and if looking at what Andrew wrote, hold on, like where is it now? Distributes, and that would be changed, distributes or makes available. I think that change, even though for whatever reason it's done, could make sense. Like, because making available, at least, to the lawyers, what I've been talking to, counts as, distribution as well. So somebody makes a piece of software available for download, even though nobody downloads that really, that is, equal to distribution as well.
Yeah, and the one I'm thinking of is the third case where you're not actually making it consciously available for download, but you are you're putting it out there, and one of the licenses requires that if a third party uses it, in other words, someone who's not a member of your organization, that you have to provide them with the source code or the ability to download the source code plus, depending on which license you're looking at, up to and including all the tools that you built it with, and the components that make it operate. So it's kind of an entwined subject that's actually gotten deeper since he first posed this because of the new licenses that have come out. And I don't see, is this the way that this is worded in 3.0?
Yeah, I took the copy
28?
paste from 3.0. Yeah.
Yeah, because it doesn't say or makes available in there.
No.
So I can see that that's still where his point was. I think we'll put this one on hold. I think we're probably out of time today, aren't we? Oh yeah, we're overtime. Sorry about that. I guess I should never pick 3. All right. If everyone's in agreement, I will pose this one to Shane and tell him that we're unsure how to move forward without a deeper technical legal discussion on the specifics of the new licensing schemes, and how to incorporate
But personally, I think that, making the change that Andrew had there, could make sense.
All right. Well, if nobody's got any objections to this, I'm going to punt this over to Shane, and I'll talk to him tomorrow about this, since I don't want to call him at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. So we didn't get to the rest of the meeting agenda. If y'all want to take a look at it, you can see the things that everyone's working on in the other groups. And if there are no other issues, then we'll bring this meeting to a close. Does anyone have anything else they wanted to bring up today? No? All right. Well, thank you all very much for your time and your patience and your contributions. It was a good meeting. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a great day. It's dinner time for us here. Ciao, ciao.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye now.